Money FM 89.3. Best of breakfast. Morning Shot.
Welcome to Morning Shot. In recent weeks, we saw U.S. President Donald Trump announce and introduce 10% tariffs on goods from China, which has hit back by announcing similar charges on some U.S. products. In addition to that, Trump has also said that tariffs on EU goods could happen, quote, pretty soon, but suggested a deal could be worked out with the U.K.
Meanwhile, Trump has hit the pause button for now, at least, on imposing tariffs against imports from U.S. neighbours Canada and Mexico, thanks to last-minute agreements with the leaders of both countries on boosting border security. For more insights on what could get more expensive for us laypersons under Trump's tariffs, we're joined by Sumit Agarwal, Professor of Finance, Economics and Real Estate at the NUS Business School. Good morning, Sumit.
Good morning. How are you guys?
Good. How are you?
Good.
Enjoying this trade war chatter?
Yes, it'll only get worse.
It'll only get worse. That's not a good omen. All right, let's crack on with it then. China, which has retaliated with its own tariffs on U.S. products, that's been dominating news headlines of late. How does this back and forth escalation, Sumit, affect global markets when it comes to trade? And secondly, which sectors in particular will be the most affected here?
Yeah, so I think, let's think about the stock market. Clearly, there is a reaction on the stock market when these kind of things happen because prices go up, the companies don't like these uncertainties, market players don't like it. So we know as soon as he had announced this similar tariffs for Canada and Mexico, the stock market took a hit, hence he pulled it back. Now we can see the same reaction for China. Now, which sectors? I think the problem is he has a broad spectrum of tariffs that are covering so many different things that the reaction will be mostly in transportation sector because the kind of things America is importing from China and where the trade imbalance is. Because China already has tariffs on U.S. cars and trucks, whereas U.S. did not have. And so he's saying, now I'm going to impose tariffs on those. And obviously, apparels and other daily usage goods that U.S. is importing. So all these places, and I think about Walmart or other companies, that will be essentially paying the tariff, and those are the companies that will be hit with this.
All right. Well, Professor, tit-for-tat tariffs aren't very surprising, but let's look at potential implications here. Just to name some of the key imports from the U.S. to the U.S. from Mexico, China, and Canada, they include delivery trucks, electric batteries, crude petroleum, insulated wires. If Trump's proposed tariffs were to move forward, how might that impact prices on this front, both in the U.S. and beyond?
I mean, prices will go up. I mean, as many people before have already explained how tariffs work, ultimately tariffs are paid by the company that is importing these goods. And what do these companies do? Most of the time, they will just pass on these tariffs to the consumers. So consumers will end up paying. Now, in the longer run, what will happen, production will shift away from these companies. These companies, instead of importing, will start thinking, I need to find cheaper sources that could be either abroad or I have to produce them internally because it's just not viable for me to keep paying such high tariffs. Now, for that, you need lots of things to happen. You need cheaper labor, you need cheaper production, automation. And so while Trump is hoping that this will cause, less import and more domestic production, we have seen from the last time when he was putting tariffs on, washing machines, washing machine prices went up, but local production of washing machines really did not happen. So it's just not very clear how these things work because labor in the U.S. is quite expensive. So it's not easy for them to shift to, domestic production.
Yeah, that's a good point, Sumit. Now, aside from those key sectors, let's hone in on how lay consumers like Audrey and I, or even our listeners who are tuning in, might be affected. What would you say are the top 5 items that might see price increases, if you could narrow it down to that? And how likely are we to experience those inflated prices here in Asia?
Yeah, so for the U.S., obviously, the tariffs will be widely experienced. I mean, if I kind of start thinking about naming products, food products, fruits. Lots of the fruits in the U.S. are imported from Mexico. As you pointed out, solar panels, the trucks, all of this are imported. And all these products that are being imported, the consumers will feel them in their pocketbook right away. In the U.S. right away, and slowly we'll start feeling these effects in Asia, including even in Singapore, because essentially prices of all these products will go up and transportation routes, the supply chains will start feeling the pressure on these things. So we in Asia also will eventually start paying more for these products. The reason is that because these tariffs will work tit for tat, because now other countries will start imposing tariffs on U.S. goods. And so those products, because that's unintended, we don't know which U.S. goods tariffs will go up, and those products will become more expensive, let's say in Singapore or in India or let's say in China.
All right, well, I guess we'll have to brace ourselves for the trickle-down effects of all of this. So we've discussed the broader effects on different sectors, including technology, agriculture, automotive that you mentioned. But some industries will be more vulnerable than others. So which sectors are the most vulnerable, and how can SMEs in these industries kind of adapt to remain competitive here?
So I'm not sure there is more or less vulnerable at this point, because what he's announcing is very broad-based tariffs. I mean, imagine the only sectors that will be protected is if you're just purely doing domestic production. Now, those are very few and far between, even in the U.S., because it's a vast country. It can do local production. But most of these things are interlinked. You may be producing the ultimate product, but most of the parts for that product are coming from abroad, either Canada or Mexico. So this is true all around the world because the supply chains are so interlinked. Some parts are made somewhere. I mean, imagine if you're eating Norwegian salmon. Norwegian salmon is caught in Norway, but it's sent to Thailand for actually cleaning and removing scaling, and then it's sent back, and then it's exported from there. So every product that we are buying in today's market has some interlinkages to other countries. So it's hard to argue that, one product or this is just will be broad-based. The question may be where the tariffs will be more biting to the consumers. For the average consumer, the more biting tariffs will be in daily product goods like clothing, like food, like transportation, because that will be immediately felt by them.
Yeah, as you've rightly pointed out, a big portion perhaps of the cost of tariffs could end up being borne, or is likely to be borne by consumers, in that sellers will likely raise the price of goods that they are importing. So the follow-up here is, could that also affect inflation in an adverse manner?
Yes, it will have an effect on inflation because these kind of tariffs will cause the prices to go up, whereas we are not seeing, wages to go up in a similar fashion. So we'll end up, essentially the small amount of money that we make will be ended up chasing the goods that are at a higher price. So it will create inflation for the average consumer. And this will be the worst kind because this is not easy to solve, because the only way you will be able to solve this is to raise wages or to do automation. And if you do automation, then you're affecting people's wages even further. And eventually we will see this higher inflation, or not just in the U.S., but we'll start feeling the effect of inflation within Singapore and broadly in Asia.
Do you see potentially then, some in Asia turning to domestic alternatives, in order to avoid the higher cost of foreign imported products?
Not necessarily domestic, but what may happen, we'll just isolate America and we'll say we don't need to buy goods from the U.S. Because U.S. is pushing these high tariffs. It's not necessarily other countries are imposing tariffs on Singapore imports. So we'll just say, look, we'll just buy them from Malaysia or Indonesia, which are nearby, and where we can have bilateral trade agreements where we don't get hit with these high tariffs.
All right. Well, looking ahead, Professor, we know that Trump has hit the pause button for some of these tariffs. So what are the key factors that you think will determine whether these tariffs stay in place or are eventually lifted? Do you foresee a significant shift in U.S. trade policy in the near future that we should be ready for?
Yeah, so I think the reason he hit the pause button is he was actually seeing the data, which is the stock market data, and other factors that were telling him, look, this is not viable. So he said, okay, let's try to make a deal, as he usually does. But he's a big fan of tariffs, mostly because tariffs help bring in money into the treasury. And this is one way kind of to bring in, the boost up government resources. Now, so he will come back to this. I mean, he did promise Mexico and Canada he will not raise tariffs, but then he immediately today raised the tariffs on steel and aluminum for Mexico and Canada. So he has already gone back on his word. I mean, so those tariffs will be coming because this idea that, we'll put 10,000 troops, fentanyl and immigration will be curbed, I don't see that happening in a 30-day period. So once these tariffs come to these countries, this will have effects on trade, on prices, and on economic growth for this part of the world, and also, I think, broadly.
All right. Well, that was a great overview on these tariffs that can have very far-reaching consequences affecting everything from global supply chains to consumer prices and inflation. Professor, it's been great, as always, having you on the show. Thanks for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate your time, Professor. It's been terrific speaking to you. That was Sumit Agarwal, Professor of Finance, Economics and Real Estate at NUS Business School. Stay with Money FM 89.3.
To listen to more great interviews, download our podcasts at audio.sg or download the audio app. That's AWEDIO, audio at the App Store and Google Play.